So as a reminder, this is being taped for future prosperity and other review. As you see on here, we have a tiny link up there, and as I explain in a few minutes, all these materials that I usually produce around service virus security work, I put it up as public domain. So this points to a wiki that I maintain, that I asked by the community to start republishing my materials about a year ago. I did a seminar at MAAWG in February, and then I'm doing more seminars up there, and every time I do new workshops and seminars, I keep on posting materials there. So it's a good wiki to kind of bookmark, because as we are trying to lock down and secure our infrastructure from the miscreants, more materials go up there. If you see anything up there that you say, hey, I'd love to get that slide, email me. Sometimes I say my role in the community is I create the slides for the people who actually have to justify to their bosses to get something done. And if I can shortcut the work for you by actually doing the slide for you, because you say, hey, I'll take that slide and I convince my boss, and you've deployed a security technique, all great, okay? So I put the PDFs up there just as a convenience sake, and then if you want the PowerPoints, you just let me know. I'm going to be going through a couple of modules to give a precursor so everybody's on the same stage or the same common understanding where we come up with these techniques. But this is primarily built towards a new best common recommendation that we're making for all the service providers, which is to have some way of working with your customers and remediating botnet issues. You got infections on your network, your customers are getting infected, and to come up with a remediation standpoint. So we call this, best practice number 11 of the big things that we've been recommending in the big service providers for a while. And we'll put that in context with it. So as I mentioned before, this is a body of materials. This is a body of materials that was started not just with me, but a bunch of peers in the industry. I happen to be the custodian of creating a lot of slides. Other people do this work. You'll primarily see these things presented at NANOGs, RIPEs, Apricots, because our focus in the past has been locking on the core infrastructure, right? And those conferences are where you usually present it. There's videos of this up there done by several people. And if you see slides and say, hey, I've seen that slide before, don't be surprised, because as I said, we reutilize the slides many times with it. Let's make sure this works with it. Okay, so all the materials are posted on the wiki, and the goal here is to provide service providers with techniques you can work and deploy. This also works in enterprises. So anybody here who is an enterprise, big network, military network, banking network, financial network, these techniques usually work with any of the big networks, right? So, so they're pretty ubiquitous, and they've been working out quite well. Some of the other things that are driving this, and this is what we'll get to, is Australia's iCode, the FCC CISRIC, Japan, Korea, Singapore. Countries are starting to put expectations on the service providers to say, this is what we expect out of you. In this economic loss we're facing with cybercrime, we're asking service providers to do their part. And in some places, like in Singapore, IDA, which is the regulator there, says that if there is a botnet of over 200 victims in Singapore, the service providers have to act. Now, have to act is a vague term, but they have to act. So here you have regulatory requirement for action. And so this is something that we're probably going to see more of from regulators who represent civic society on service providers if the service providers don't do something. So when you have things like volunteer codes of practice and you don't do it, expect civic society to step up, because there is a big risk out there. One of the core principles you'll see through here is my really overemphasis on human collaboration. The number one tool we have to battle the miscreants today is actually our collaborative effort. Groups like MAAWG are critical. Groups like MAAWG make a difference, right? There are formal groups like MAAWG. There are informal groups like NSPSec, OPSEC Trust, YASML, II. But this groupings of us as human beings, network professionals, gaining trust and interacting and working with each other is our most effective tool against the bad guys. So please take advantage, those of you who are here, who are old-timers of MAAWG, reach out to new people, reach out to the people who've been around for a while, exchange cards, sit down, talk to each other, have a beer with each other, kind of figure out how to interconnect with each other, because that is probably the best number one thing you can walk away from a group like MAAWG, and other activities and groups with it. So it's pretty critical with it. Now, this isn't the agenda for the day. This is just kind of walking through some of the techniques with it, and I'll walk through these as briefly to put everybody on the same page so we know what these top 10 techniques are. I'm going to be focusing on the new one, which is the botnet remediation work. All right. So the first hour we'll go through with some of the core principles, and then we'll get to the botnet remediation activities. So we can see we'll walk through these. In today's tutorials is talking about the fundamentals. You'll see tutorials and you'll see white papers and you see presentations on the wiki site from other parts of it that go in depth. And then if you have any desire to go in depth in any of these topics, not only myself but others of my peers out there, will help you. Like for instance, to say, okay, I really need to figure out how to deploy a sinkhole into my system, because with a sinkhole I can drop in, some of the sinkhole detector systems out there. And this will help me out because I can get better visibility on my network. But how do I configure a sinkhole? What are the factors with it? Well, presentations on here will give you an overview of it, but then you can contact me, and it's not just me, and several other people who've done it before will put you in contact with engineers and different service providers who will help you. What you'll find is certain architectural principles like that, we are very open with each other and say, okay, when I did it on my network, here's my mistakes, here's what I learned, don't do this, do it this way, and they'll be very honest with you with how the deployment experiences work with it. So we can't go in depth with everything with it. There's also an invitation to participate with it. If you would like to go out there and teach it locally, because you can go back to your locality and say, I want to teach a bunch of these techniques out there, or I want to help with it, or I want to write with it, just raise your hand, let me know during a break or afterwards. I'd love to have you be part of the team that helps refresh these stuff. So let's give an overview. We are all, some of the things I won't dwell into too much because we are all here at MAAWG. And being at MAAWG, you are one of the converted. There's a threat. There's pain, right? So I don't have to convince you that there's a threat or pain, right? But we all know, what do you tell the boss when you get hit with some sort of attack, a DOS attack and things like that. In the industry, one of the big watersheds in the service provider world happened in February 2000. February 2000, there was a NANOG in San Jose, California. And I came in the morning, and I'm sitting next to a buddy of mine, and we're having coffee. And then the speaker, because you can know the speaker, you can watch this on tape. Steve Bellevin's up there giving a talk about distributed denial of service attacks. He's giving his talk, and you can hear in the background a whole bunch of people grab their laptops and start running out of the room. And me and my buddy are going like, what's going on? Well, that was this big first public visible DDoS attack. The next day, it was a watershed moment. That's when a whole bunch of people in backbone world in the service providers said, we need to organize ourselves. We need to figure out how to actually lock down and secure our network. Up until that time period, people were more interested in how do we scale, because it was all the massive internet growth stuff with the whole internet bubble going on. People weren't really worried about security. Since that time period, there's been a concerted interest on it. So much so that even responses at country level, like you can read this article in Wired magazine where they talk about the community of the vetted. A lot of our work, our productive work, happens in these side, closed, vetted communities where people start to meet each other at activity like here at MAAWG, and then you start working with each other, and then you have a common interest. There's a botnet, there's a DOS attack, there's a DOS attack trend, or some sort of criminal activity, and people band together to start working with each other to protect each other, right? So this vetted community is, had been effectiveness. The Estonia attack, a colleague of mine is walking around here. If you want to know her name, she called me up in the middle of the night and said, hey, Estonia's under attack. We need to get NSPSec involved. And I immediately went out there and called a bunch of people NSPSec, and all of a sudden we had, all the major service providers around the world within a half an hour all working to protect Estonia. And all it took was a phone call, no one to call in a trusted community, and we called each other. We had each other's cell phone numbers, woke each other up, and started working on the problem. All right. That wasn't like a big national countries talking to each other to do it. That was all service providers working together, and nobody argued or complained. Even though, big service provider in the United States was protecting Estonia and the other side of the world, nobody complained about doing that because we know it's kind of all in our self-interest to take care of this stuff. Because all this stuff inter-AS, don't have to convince them. So we have a whole bunch of groups on here, and there's a presentation you can download on the operational security community where so you can get more details with it that talks to a lot of these different groups and should you participate with them or have people on your staff participate with them. There's a bunch of groups out there. But one of the groups is NSPSec, because I'll mention this out there. NSPSec was focused on the backbone security. How many people here are with service providers right now? Just raise your hand out there. Okay. How many people have people on NSPSec? All right. See, not enough. Everybody who raised their hand on, that, hey, I work at a service provider, somebody on your team should be on NSPSec, because if there's a big DDoS, especially DDoS level attacks, this is the group that takes care of it. In the early days, this was the main group knocking down the botnets. People remember IRC-based botnets? IRC-based botnets, all right, were no longer in existence because this group was very effective in knocking down IRC-based botnets. An IRC-based botnet would pop up, we identify it, we whack down the command and control channel because this group would be able to go out there and knock it down. Well, what happens? Behavior therapy, what happens with it is you'd start knocking down something. The bad guys adjust, they change their behavior pattern. And we don't see IRC-based command and control systems anymore because this group would be knocking it down all the time. But it shows the effectiveness. It shows that a whole group of service providers industry-wide can collaborate with each other and make a difference. So some people would say, oh, the fact that we actually knock down IRC-based botnets as an industry, oh, wow, maybe we should have eliminated botnets. Well, we can't eliminate botnets totally, but it does show that we can actually have a huge difference if we all work together, focusing on the same sort of behavior, right? And this goes in line when we talk about, remediating violating customers. If we're all remediating violating customers using the same techniques, we will cause a change to the miscreants because we've done it before and we can do it again. The other thing to kind of look at this is there are two big camps on remediating botnets, all right? One camp looks at it as a public health sort of system, right? Which is useful tools look at it from a public health standpoint, right? Because you can use aspect of public health. And we've used that before in the public health system. Slammer as an example. Slammer we used, it just so happened we did a tabletop exercise 2 weeks before Slammer in the NSPSec community and used a WHO pandemic exercise as a way of figuring out how to quarantine a worm. And then Slammer happened, and immediately we were on the phone with each other, and Slammer was remediated by using the WHO pandemic control point methodology. We kind of said, here's where we need to put the filters in, and we started working the filters out and started recovering the internet from Slammer. So public health models applied to cybersecurity have worked, can work. Myself, I'm in the second camp. Botnets today, done by the cyber criminals, is primarily an economic issue. And if you want to stop it, I'm very much in a law enforcement economic standpoint of disrupting the criminal economic enterprise, all right? So you got to look at the economics involved. So it's not just a matter of taking your customers and protecting your customers. You got to realize your customers are victims of crime. So I'm of the camp personally where I look at your customers getting violated at the same thing as your customer's house getting broken into, right? And you're sitting there watching your customer's house getting broken into, and in civic society, if you just sit there and just don't do nothing, then Some people say, well, that's not right, right? So I'm of the second model because I see these economic cycles going back and forth. Like right now, we're in a new wave of DDoS attacks, right? So we've seen a lot of different DDoS attacks. Well, this is the third wave of DDoS attacks I've lived through over the past decade, right? And some people say, oh, this is pretty bad. I say, okay, here's what we did in the past to knock these things down. And it wasn't just putting defenses up there and disrupting them. We had to actually go after the perpetrators and lock them up or disrupt their money flows. In 2005, when we had a big wave of DDoS attacks in Europe, the key thing that we used to actually knock them down was eliminating the place where they were getting the money dumped into from the extortion, because it was extortion. I will DOS your site unless you pay me money. Here's the bank account. And then we work with FBI Interpol and close those banks down, and then the DOS attack stopped, right? So there's very much an economic standpoint with this, right? And so when you're in the lull period and the attack waves go down, that's the time period to invest, to prepare, right? And it's always going to be a challenge convincing your bosses to say, this is the time period to invest. Don't wait until the problem hits us in the face, because that's the most expensive time to actually deploy technology to protect your customers and protect your infrastructure. When the pain is the highest, it's actually the cost is the highest, and you go out there and spend the most money. So in a world of service providers where we have tight margins, going to the bosses and remind them, we got a cycle here, all right? We don't see a lot of problem X, so let's go work on mitigating that now instead of waiting until the criminal cycle comes around and hits us again. So these cycles repeat over time with it. So now, where are these materials coming from? We got this community, MAAWG, all these other communities. We work with each other. We talk to each other. We deploy techniques, and then we start figuring out which things work and what things don't work. We always look for the most cost-effective way of doing things, and then we document them all together into this materials here. So these materials deploy out there. This includes vendor work. So vendors who are smart, are participating in this sort of work, and they're improving their equipment with it. So one of the things to look at when you look at vendor selection is talk to your vendors and say, are you participating in these groups? Do you send people to MAAWG and other activities out there, right? If they don't, and they're a security company and they don't participate, they don't fight the fight, then you kind of say, let me talk to the next vendor. That's one of the criteria me as I shift out of the vendor world. You could look at my LinkedIn bio. I spent 14 years in the vendor world. I'm moving back to operator, so I'm going to be working for a major operator in Asia. And as I shift back to the operator world, that's some of the key things I look at for vendors. It says, do you fight the fight, as I call it? Do you have people in your organization who goes out there with your customers and fight the fight? Because if you don't do that, then your equipment's not going to be good, right? That's one of my personal criteria I'll look at with it. So look at that with vendor work. The other thing to look at is 40-40-20 rule. Sean Dunlalian, who works for the government, you can look him up there. He came up with this thing when he was at SBC, way back when SBC was around, called the 40-40-20 rule. And this is a core thing for us for mitigation work, right? What he found was that 40% of the customers patch right away, do something right away. So as we get into this section and we talk about customer remediation and remediating botnets, there's a certain percentage of customers who are going to be easy. You can say, please jump. Yes, I'll jump. Please patch. They'll patch, right? Please fix this, run this little utility and get the botnet off the computer. Yes, they'll do that, right? Then you run into another group that is going to be a little bit harder to get them to do something. Hello, wake up, please pay attention and do something, all right? Then there's going to be 20% customers, that last 20. This is the 80-20 rule, right? That last 20% is going to be the, knock them on the head, please patch your system, right? Do something, right? Quarantine them off, argue with them. Those are the ones out there. So these first 80% are what we find, and this is like a rule that we see all over again. These are the cheapest customers to remediate. That last 20% is the most expensive. And it's that. What this also says is we're never going to have a perfect remediation system. We're never going to have a way that go out there and just eliminate botnets all throughout your system, because it's always going to be that last 20% that's going to be the most difficult with it. So this next presentation, I'll walk through, just talk through each one of these things, of these 11 ones, so you can see what they are, so we get everybody familiar with. And hopefully, as I ask you out there, we'll be able to, work them out. I mean, find out if you actually got some of these deployed.